Let me tell you a story about a man who had everything: money, power, and influence, but he lacked the one thing that could have saved him from the most embarrassing moment of his life: humility. Picture this: a luxurious restaurant where the chandeliers sparkle like diamonds and every table is filled with the rich and famous. The atmosphere buzzes with laughter and conversation, punctuated by the soft clinking of fine china. It is here that we find James Parker, a billionaire real estate mogul, sitting at his favorite table by the window. He has everything: wealth, status, and a reputation for getting exactly what he wants. But today his arrogance would lead him down a path of embarrassment he never expected. James Parker was not just rich, he was filthy rich. A man whose name was synonymous with opulence, James had built an empire in real estate, amassing billions that afforded him a lifestyle few could dream of. He owned sprawling mansions, luxury cars, and even a private jet. But along with his wealth came an insatiable ego, a belief that his money could shield him from any consequence. As he strolled into the restaurant, his designer suit tailored to perfection, James felt the eyes of the room on him. He thrived on the attention, walking with a swagger that made it clear he was accustomed to being the center of attention. The waitstaff scurried to cater to his needs, anticipating his every whim. James reveled in the power he wielded over them. They were merely pawns in his lavish game. Today, he had a business deal to discuss with some associates, a deal that would further cement his status as a titan in the industry. He settled into his usual table, ensuring it had the best view of the bustling street outside, where the world passed by, oblivious to his presence. As the waiter approached, James barely glanced up from his phone. He tapped on the screen, scrolling through emails and messages, his mind racing with thoughts of money and power. Enter David, a young waiter with aspirations that extended beyond his current job. He was in his early 20s, juggling classes at the local community college while working to support his sick mother. David wore a simple black uniform, a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding him. Despite the pressure of his responsibilities, he approached each table with a smile, determined to provide excellent service. Assigned to James Parker's table on this particular day, David felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Serving such a high-profile customer was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was an opportunity to impress. On the other, the fear of making a mistake loomed large. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I start you off with something to drink?" David asked, his voice steady despite the flutter in his stomach. Without looking up, James snapped, "Just water. Bottled. None of that tap junk. And be quick about it." His tone dripped with disdain. David nodded, trying to mask his nervousness as he rushed to fetch the drink. The restaurant was busy, and he had several other tables to attend to. He maneuvered through the crowded dining area, balancing plates and drinks while keeping a friendly demeanor. Returning to James's table, David carefully placed the bottle of water on the table, but his hands shook slightly. A few drops splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth. An innocent mistake. James's eyes narrowed, and his patience evaporated. "Are you serious?" he barked, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby diners. "How incompetent can you be? I come to a place like this, and this is the service I get. Maybe you should stick to flipping burgers." David's face turned crimson as embarrassment washed over him. He stammered an apology, desperately trying to clean up the spilled water with a napkin. The laughter and whispers of other patrons stung like daggers, each word a reminder of his lower status in this gilded world. "You should be thankful people like me even let you serve us," James continued, his voice dripping with arrogance. "People like you don't belong in places like this." The humiliation cut deep, but David forced himself to remain calm. He understood that his job was to serve, no matter how demeaning the treatment. "I'm really sorry, sir. I'll get you a fresh napkin," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As David hurried away, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was just trying to make ends meet to help his family, but in this moment, he felt smaller than ever. While James continued to berate David, a sleek black car pulled up outside the restaurant. A tall, sharply dressed man stepped out, exuding an aura of quiet confidence. This was Mr. Reynolds, a name that commanded respect in the business world. Although he was a stranger to most in the restaurant, Those who recognized him shifted in their seats, sensing something significant was about to happen. Mr. Reynolds entered the restaurant with purpose, his gaze scanning the room until it landed on the commotion at James's table. He approached the owner of the restaurant, whispering something that immediately turned the owner's expression pale. Without hesitation, the owner rushed toward James's table, Mr. Reynolds following closely behind. James was too consumed by his anger to notice the stir his outburst had caused. He thought himself untouchable, as if the world revolved around him. The other patrons watched in a mix of curiosity and concern, unsure of what would unfold. Mr. Reynolds, standing tall and composed, arrived at James's table, fixing him with an unwavering stare. "Mr. Parker," he said calmly, "I believe we need to talk." James looked up, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion. "Do I know you?" he asked dismissively, still seated, unwilling to show any sign of weakness. Mr. Reynolds smiled faintly, a glint of authority in his eyes. "No, but you will." It turned out Mr. Reynolds was not just another patron. He was the owner of the entire restaurant chain, an empire built on a commitment to quality and respect for both customers and employees. And David, the young waiter James had just humiliated? He was Mr. Reynolds' nephew. "You've been making quite the scene here, Mr. Parker," Mr. Reynolds said, his voice low but firm. "I own this restaurant. In fact, I own dozens just like it. And let me tell you something, the way you treated that young man, it doesn't sit well with me." James's face went pale as the realization hit him. He was no longer dealing with a mere waiter, but a man of influence who could easily dismantle his empire with a single phone call. "Who do you think you are?" James shot back, attempting to regain control of the situation. "You're just some businessman playing hero. I can have you removed from here in seconds." Mr. Reynolds leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper yet filled with authority. "You don't understand, do you? It's not just about this restaurant. It's about how you treat people. You think your wealth gives you the right to belittle others? I will not allow that behavior in any establishment I own." The tension in the room thickened. James, once the king of his world, found himself cornered. The laughter and whispers from earlier had faded into an uncomfortable silence. Every patron in the room was now an audience to his downfall. James stammered, desperate for an escape. "You don't know who I am. I can make or break your reputation." Mr. Reynolds shook his head, unfazed. "And what does that say about you, Mr. Parker? That you would use your wealth to intimidate and belittle others? I don't cater to people like you. You are no longer welcome in any of my restaurants." With that, Mr. Reynolds straightened up, signaling to the owner who stood frozen nearby. "Please escort Mr. Parker out," he instructed calmly. The owner, still in shock, nodded slowly, his eyes darting between James and Mr. Reynolds. James, realizing he had no allies left, shot one last glare at David, who stood off to the side, still shaken by the encounter. As the owner approached James's table, he felt a mix of anger and disbelief. "You can't do this to me," he shouted, his voice rising as he stood up. "I'll have your job for this." But the owner remained resolute. "I'm afraid you've brought this upon yourself, Mr. Parker. I cannot condone your behavior. Please leave." James's mind raced, scrambling for a way to salvage his dignity. The other patrons watched, some with pity, others with satisfaction. He was a man who had been untouchable, and now he faced the harsh reality of consequence. James stood, fury boiling within him. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice cracking. "I'll have you all blacklisted. You'll never work in this town again." As he stormed out, he could feel the eyes of the restaurant burning into his back. The whispers resumed, the shock of the moment giving way to gossip and speculation. Once outside, James felt the weight of humiliation settle over him like a heavy cloak. He clutched his phone, ready to make a call to his lawyer, to unleash his fury in any way possible. But deep down, he knew he was facing something far greater than a mere business rivalry. This was a wake-up call. A moment that forced him to confront his own arrogance. As the weeks passed, the fallout from that incident lingered like a dark cloud over James's life. News of his public humiliation spread quickly, painting him as a tyrant who had belittled a hard-working young man. His reputation, once unassailable, took a hit that his wealth could not fix. Business associates began to distance themselves from him, wary of being associated with a man who had displayed such blatant disrespect. Invitations to exclusive events dwindled, and the once-admired billionaire found himself isolated. Meanwhile, David continued to work at the restaurant, his spirits lifted by the unexpected support from his family and the patrons who rallied behind him. Mr. Reynolds, seeing potential in his nephew, offered him a promotion, allowing David to take on more responsibility and eventually move into a managerial role. David thrived in this new position, grateful for the opportunity to work alongside his uncle. He learned the ins and outs of running a restaurant, but more importantly, he learned the value of kindness and respect in the workplace. The incident with James had taught him a lesson he would carry for life. No one is above anyone else, regardless of status or wealth. On the other hand, James faced the consequences of his actions. Without the constant stream of high-profile events and deals, he found himself alone, grappling with the emptiness of his life. Money could not buy him friends, and the isolation weighed heavily on him. He began to reflect on his behavior, the way he had treated people as mere objects in his path. The moment he had humiliated David replayed in his mind like a broken record. He realized that he had let his wealth define him, rather than his character. Determined to make a change, James began to seek out opportunities for redemption. He volunteered at local shelters, using his resources to help those in need. It was a stark contrast to the life he had once lived, but he found fulfillment in giving back. Slowly, he began to understand the true meaning of success. Months later, James found himself in a small cafe, dressed in modest clothing. The hustle and bustle of the restaurant scene he once ruled now felt distant. He was no longer the arrogant billionaire. He was just another customer, enjoying a simple cup of coffee. As he sat in the corner, he spotted David walking in, dressed in a crisp uniform, his face glowing with confidence. David had transformed since their last encounter, a stark reminder of how far he had come. Their eyes met, and for a moment, James expected hostility. But instead, David offered a polite nod, recognition of their shared past but also of the growth that had taken place since. "Good to see you, David," James said, his voice soft, devoid of the bravado that once defined him. David paused, surprised by the sincerity in James's tone. "Good to see you too, Mr. Parker." James's heart sank at the formality. "Please call me James," he replied. "I'm trying to be a better person." David studied him for a moment, weighing his words. "I appreciate that. It takes a lot to admit when you're wrong." James nodded, feeling the weight of his past choices. "I was a fool. I let my ego blind me to what really matters. I hope you can forgive me for how I treated you." David hesitated, reflecting on the pain of that day, but also the growth that had followed. "I believe in second chances. We all deserve the opportunity to change." With that, the tension between them eased. They shared a moment of understanding, a glimpse into the potential for forgiveness and growth. As time went on, James continued to work on himself, forming friendships with those he had once overlooked. He sought out opportunities to mentor young entrepreneurs, hoping to guide them without the arrogance he had once displayed. David, now in a managerial position, often found himself in contact with James through various community events. Their paths crossed frequently, and what began as animosity slowly transformed into a budding friendship. They learned from one another, each understanding that wealth and status meant little compared to the value of respect and kindness. One day, as they worked together on a charity event, David turned to James. "You know, you've really changed. It's inspiring to see someone take responsibility for their actions." James smiled, a genuine warmth radiating from him. "Thank you, David. I owe a lot of that to you. You showed me that true strength comes from humility." Their relationship blossomed, a testament to the power of second chances. James became a voice for kindness in the business community, advocating for respect and equality. He used his influence to support local charities, focusing on initiatives that uplifted those in need. In the end, James Parker learned that wealth could not shield him from the consequences of his actions. He had faced his demons and emerged a better man, ready to embrace the world with open arms. David, too, had grown, realizing that every encounter, good or bad, shaped who we are. As they stood together at a charity event, surrounded by laughter and camaraderie, James turned to David. "I never thought I'd find myself here, working alongside someone I once treated so poorly. Thank you for giving me a chance to make things right. David grinned, filled with hope for the future. We're all a work in progress, James, and that's what makes life beautiful. With that, they raised their glasses in a toast, a symbol of redemption, friendship, and the realization that true worth lies not in wealth, but in the way we treat one another. As we wrap up this story, remember that every interaction we have can shape the world around us. James Parker learned the hard way that humility and respect are the true measures of a person's worth. David's strength and kindness showed us that even in the face of adversity, we can rise above and make a difference. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and believe in the power of second chances, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe for more uplifting content, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What lessons have you learned from your experiences? We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep spreading kindness and remember that we all have the potential to change for the better.